Welcome back to Meet Bridget, a show that sheds light on the often untold teenage stories of successful women from all sorts of backgrounds and in all different careers. I'm Kessia Rosenberg, and together with my best friend and Meet Bridget founder, I co host this show. We are in season 5 of our Meet Bridget podcast, and we're really in the business of sharing unique perspectives and just a myriad of different journeys that each of our successful female guests have taken, how they've grown through and in spite of their life experiences. Today is really special. I'm welcoming an incredibly talented soul sister of mine onto the show. This is actually the first time we're seeing each other in over 12 or 13 years. And over the last decade, she's kept herself really busy. So, Rebecca Raoof is a family nurse practitioner with specialized expertise in cosmetic and general dermatology. She's board certified family nurse practitioner in 3 different states: California, New York, and New Jersey. Her clinical expertise is focused on acne, acne scars, rashes, eczema, psoriasis, cancer screenings, chemical peels, Botox fillers, you name it, anything to do with the skin, she does it. Her calm demeanor and friendly approach make her easily approachable by her patients. She's a psychology graduate of UC Berkeley. She earned her bachelor's in nursing as well as her FNP at Columbia University. She continued her education in dermatology under the tutelage of Dr. David Goldberg of Skin, Laser, and Surgery Specialists of New York and New Jersey, where she completed her dermatology fellowship. From there, she gained a profound knowledge of cosmetic and medical grade dermatology, as well as an understanding of the use of lasers. Today, she practices with her father, providing care at Raoof MD Dermatology. In her spare time, she's become the ultimate homesteader, crafter, mom of 2, gardener, you name it. I am so excited to have you on the show, and literally, like we said just a few minutes ago before jumping on the mic, you are a total girl crush of mine. Like, I have just loved watching you grow as a human being and a mom and just into adulthood. And it sounds creepy, but I've been watching you through socials and admiring you. We also do talk, but
I gotta say that was a really beautiful introduction. Thank you. It's really exciting to be here, to be asked to interview, to be on the podcast. Really cool. And also really interesting to hear your spiel. Like, there's so much that I've done or that we've all done, but it's not really at the forefront of who I imagine myself to be anymore because it's been so long. But you're right. That's all me and more. And we'll dive into that. So that's pretty cool.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we've been doing this for 4+ seasons now, and Asha, my partner, and I, one of the things that we were talking about is we really have enjoyed putting together the bios of each one of our guests because, like you said, nobody really thinks about themselves in a full, like, the laundry list of everything that they've done. And it's really cool to, just see everyone's faces light up when they're like, wait, I have done that. And that's true. And that's true. And, I think sometimes we get so stuck in the weeds of just doing life and being that, those little steps that are so incremental at the time, I mean, you look back and you're just like, wow, that really did amount to a whole lot of work and accomplishment.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, especially in the world of social media where we're constantly bombarded with other people's accolades and other people's, huge achievements. It really, you forget your own, and you forget, how far you've come or just where you're at.
Yeah.
But yeah, really cool. Thank you for that. And I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited to catch up with you and see where this goes.
I know, me too. Me too. Well, thank you for taking the time to join our show and to speak to our audience. So I want to start from the beginning. We met in college, freshman year. I was starting at Mount St. Mary's. You spent a little bit of time there before moving on, but I have always known you to be incredibly detail oriented. You've always had such a beautiful demeanor. Like, the the loveliness just radiates off of you. Like, you're a very warm, like, genuine person, and I think that is probably what made me gravitate toward you at that stage in my life. didn't have very many friends going into college, and it's all so new and scary and everything. And you were just one of those people that was like, yeah, open arms, like, let's be friends, let's chat. And so I've always loved that about you. I would love for you to share with our audience where that comes from, a little bit about your background, maybe where you were born, some of your family dynamics, things like that.
Yeah. Well, just to respond to what you said, it was a very fleeting period, that semester in college that we met. And I also have really fond memories. And my impression of you that I've always had with me is the like light that radiates from you. I know this is an interview for me, but just putting that out there. Just the joy and the lightheartedness. That's always been something that's how I remember you, and that's who you are. So just, the mutual girl crush is there, and just that's where it started. That's where we started our little journey.
I
But
love
in
that.
terms of where I came from, what like me, it's a big one. So I was born and raised in Calabasas, a suburb of Los Angeles, pre-Kardashian, whatever it is now. It was an era when my parents moved there. There were like strawberry fields and like houses were just being built. So it was just a very different time. My parents are Iranian. They escaped Iran during the revolution. So that was a big part of shaping, in terms of culture and in terms of being a daughter of immigrants. That all plays into who I am as well. I grew up, in a suburban Calabasas home. I have an older sister and an older brother, who are both very dear to me. And my parents were very loving growing up, and hard workers, and they came with nothing from Iran. And, my dad was a doctor in Iran, but when they escaped, they had to start from scratch, and they didn't even speak English, and, redo school and redo medical school and all of that until, they made it happen. So, that's a lot of what I remember as well.
I mean, it is so much. I am also first generation American, and the journeys that our parents take, they so deeply affect us, and I think it really lends to the fabric, like you said, of who you are. It's it's also incredible that your parents came at a time of such tumult, political and world tumult, not too far off from where we are now, but it had to be incredibly difficult, like you said, starting over. Did they know each other already when they moved here, or did they meet in the US?
They were married and already had my sister, so they escaped with a 1-year-old. And
Oh my
actually,
God.
together now and having that perspective of like escaping with a fresh toddler,
Yeah.
kind of just like reshifts the way I see their story. So, and then, working through and everything with a baby, just
Yeah.
a huge part of a lot of people's journeys. But one that we forget when we're on the other side of that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's remarkable. There's something I think in the DNA as well. So it's not just the way we're brought up, but I think that something passes on genetically in terms of, being the child of immigrants, or immigrants specifically who escaped hardship. So I think that's something interesting to explore as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's hard to even think about moving to a different city with an infant or a toddler, let alone picking your entire life up to move to an entirely new country where you don't speak the language. And, it's basically a blank slate. So I can't believe they already had your sister, but were they both in the medical field?
Yeah, my dad was basically had just finished his residency in dermatology, and my mom was a nurse. So they moved to New York. I mean, they escaped. They landed in Spain for 6 months to try to get a visa to come. There's a whole story, but eventually they landed in New York for my dad to redo his residency here in the States, and my mom worked to put them, to put him through residency and to survive. Interestingly, they lived on 100th in New York City on 101st and Columbus Avenue. And when I lived there, when I was there for, going to school at Columbia, I lived 4 blocks away. But when they lived there, my mom told me that she would sleep with a knife under her pillow, and it was a really rough neighborhood. When I lived there was Home Goods and Whole Foods, like my coffee shop. So it really interesting parallel, same place, very different time.
Did you ever walk by where they were living?
Yeah. I walked by their building a lot. It was literally at the end of the strip of where I would go, like grocery shopping, coffee shop. There
It's
was
so full circle.
it's wild.
It's so full circle. Like your ancestors must have been looking down like this is what it's all for. Like we landed here and now she's back, like completing her education. Like big
Really
things
wild.
are coming.
Really
That's
wild.
yeah, that's literally the American dream.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about you. So you were born and raised in Calabasas. So they had moved from New York. Your dad had redone his residency and became a successful dermatologist. And your mom was a nurse. So you guys moved to Calabasas. And did they already have your brother at that point? Or
They had my brother in New York, and they moved to LA sometime between then. They lived in Tarzana, which is,
Mhm.
right around the corner from here, in an apartment for a while. And then when I was freshly born, they moved to Calabasas. And, growing up there it's a beautiful place. I mean, I think I look at my childhood through rosy glasses, and
Mhm.
hopefully the facts remain. But I do like seeing childhood like that. It was a beautiful childhood. Some turmoil we'll get to, but beautiful in terms of, growing up in Calabasas, growing up with my siblings. We were in a safe community, different world than it is now, playing out on the streets with the neighbors, like really lovely. And also a huge part of my childhood was my extended family. My mom was one of 8. So lots of brothers and sisters, lots of cousins, like I have like 20 something first cousins. And back then we would all gather at my grandparents' house every week without fail, for Shabbat dinner and spend time together constantly. So it was a beautiful time.
I don't know if we knew this about each other, but my mom is also one of 8 kids.
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah, and so I also have tons of cousins and it's really fun. I think that lends to like, a really beautiful part of childhood because you have all of these like built-in best friends. There's literally like,
Totally.
I don't know. Anytime we all get together as a family, it's like, okay, like we're only inviting the immediate family and it's like 52 people at this point, and you're like, this is like ridiculous. No restaurant wants to take us.
Totally. Yeah,
But
it was really cool and beautiful. Now it's a little different. Everyone's kind of broken off and created
yeah.
their own families. But
Hmm.
that definitely impacted me in that I don't think I'll have 8 kids. Just 100. Husbands listen to this. We are not having 8 kids. But I do want to have more kids because it's such a beautiful thing to have a big family. As
Yeah.
hard as, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was very formative as well.
Oh, I love that so much. So were you close with your siblings? You said they are very dear to you. What are the age differences between the three of you?
So my brother is 4 years older than me, and my sister is 8 years older than me. Growing up, I was like my sister's baby doll. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Very much who I am is in due to her persistence. My legal first name is actually Mika, and my middle name is Rebecca.
Hmm.
My sister really loved Full House, and she really loved Aunt Becky. So every time my parents called me Nika when I was a baby, she would throw a fit and insist that I was Rebecca. I never ended up becoming Becky, but now I only go by Rebecca, and I don't actually use my legal name at all. So my sister and I are very close. We've always been very close. We talk like 10 times a day now. But she's
Oh,
always been, a few steps ahead of me in life. So very important role model, and a second mother in a lot of ways.
yeah, that's so beautiful. I wonder if
Yeah.
my sister thinks about me like that because I'm 8 years older than her. I feel like
Oh,
She's in a phase right now where she's so cool, and I just turned 35, and she's like, "You're old."
I 100% understand. I like that to my nieces now, and it's very weird on the flip side. It is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very strange. Um, So, what were your interests growing up? Like, we know sort of like the end story, which we'll loop around to. I love that you work in a family practice with your dad and that you guys are like the dynamic duo of skin. But I want to hear a little bit more about the in between. So, did you always know that you wanted to get into the family business of medicine and that you wanted to become either a nurse or, a doctor or an FNP? I mean, I don't think I even knew that there was such a thing at the time.
Yeah, none of us did. I don't even know if it existed. But yeah, it's interesting. You're asking what were my interests as a kid. I was very much a kid. I always knew, I can't say I always knew. I always said I wanted to be a nurse. I don't know how much of that was like my mom was a nurse, therefore I want to be a nurse, or how much of that was like gender roles, like women are nurses and men are doctors, especially because that was modeled just by the happenstance of my family dynamic. But I always said I wanted to be a nurse. And it's interesting because when I graduated high school, I went to Mount St. Mary's with you and I was on the nursing track. And I had a moment where I was like, wait, is this really what I want? And, we can get to that a little later, but I ended up leaving and looped back in eventually, being like, yeah, this makes sense for me. But yeah, as a kid, I felt free. I was happy. What were my interests? I spent time with my friends. I played dolls. Yeah, that was typical childhood, I would think. Typical kid in that regard.
Yeah, just fun. I mean, I'm very familiar with the Calabasas area, and it is such a beautiful suburb. So I get, and especially looking at how you've curated your home and like your backyard and your garden now. When I think of Calabasas, I think of like the big oak trees and the sprawling land and the greenery. And so, um, I love that that's such a theme in your life, like that natural peacefulness and everything. And I can see so clearly, like in my mind's eye, like your childhood fitting right into like that kind of backdrop, which is really beautiful because I think you're creating something very, very similar for your two beautiful kids. They're so
Oh,
cute.
thank you.
Um,
It's so interesting you say that because I don't think I had the awareness growing up.
mhm.
When I look back, I feel very much like I lived in a suburb, and there were strawberry fields, and there was a
Yeah,
lot. Not everything was paved over the way it is now, which is a frustration of mine with LA, by the
yeah,
way. But I don't think I had that awareness, but clearly some of that has seeped inside of me.
I
Um,
think so.
yeah, I will also say that I always joke. My mom was from the city of Shiraz in
Mhm.
Iran, and in Shiraz, the people are known for loving gardens and having green thumbs and being out in nature. And so I always joke that that's very much in my DNA. My grandparents had a beautiful garden with like fruit trees, and they were like growing eggplant, in their like little suburban house in Canoga. And so somehow that has come back.
Yeah, the theme. That's
Yeah.
so. I'm thinking about my, like, if there are any things like that in my life because I'm very good with dead flowers, but not so great as a green thumb. But I do like I love being outside. I love flowers, I love trees, but like anything we have planted in our house, Kevin, my husband has to take care of it because it will unfortunately wither under
I don't do indoor plants. I think indoor plants are way harder, and I've killed
Really?
everything, including cacti, in my house. But
Well,
outside, I can handle.
we'll have to swap some tips and tricks and stuff, mostly your end for me, like, so I can learn how to garden. But we'll get more into that a little bit later. It's really beautiful that you take so much from your ancestry, and even just down to that anecdote of you having that green thumb passed down to you through your DNA from, your mom being from this beautiful little town. Um, I'd love to hear more about your mom if you're open to talking about it. I know she's very significant to you in your life. And just as an aside, one of the things that I will never forget is that you wrote this really like unbelievable essay in college. We had an English class together and you read it out loud, or maybe the teacher read it out loud. But I was so blown away by your use of prose, but also the the feeling and the emotion that you were able to imbue into it and how beautiful like your memories of your mom are, that it's literally stayed with me my entire like from then on, and I think about that often. Like it's one of those weird things that just lives in my head rent free.
That's really lovely. Thank you for telling me that. I know what piece you're talking about. I think that was an iteration of my college acceptance essay that I ended up using for Berkeley. So, yeah, I wrote very much about my journey through grief. I lost my mom at 15, excuse me. And she was sick from the time I was 9 years old until she passed, on and off. She had cancer and she kept, went through remission and it would come back. That has obviously played a huge role in who I am and informing a lot of the bits of me, and how I react to things and who I am as a mother too. I'm finding out as well. Yeah, my mom was wonderful. She was very warm and very caring. And, I look a lot like her. I'm wearing these bangs today. I don't usually have bangs, but I'm a little struck because every time I see myself, she had bangs for a while. So that's so weird. But yeah, she was wonderful, caring, huge in the community, made big impacts. And when she passed, it was hard for my whole family. And that's where the huge family dynamic played such a role. While she was sick, we had all of her siblings, my aunts, my uncles, friends. She had a huge community. Everyone just took care of us and gathered and was there for us. I remember my aunts and uncles like dropping off food constantly, just being around. I was always at my cousin's house, when things were rough at home, if she was going through something. So that just dealing with the dynamics of that also play a big role in me wanting a bigger family, me feeling through as a trauma response, probably that I need to have more kids. I have 2 kids now, but that I really feel like I need to have more because I need to give them more family. There's no guarantee family doesn't always stick together, but give them a chance in that regard. Very much aware that that's a trauma response. Yeah, it was hard. 15, my sister was already married at that point, so she was out of the house. My brother was just building his company, really young. He started his company really, really young and he poured himself into it. And it was tough. My dad, did his best and he, to be there for us and to also work and to keep it together. It was not an easy time. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine, especially now as a mom, and I'm sure you're a very introspective person, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
Maybe too interesting.
you're very, very self-aware. But as a girl, like that's such a significant time in your life where, most of us, we really rely on our moms. And like you hear so much now. I mean, you have a young daughter. I'm sure the thought crosses your mind sometimes of like, when she's a teenager, like these are the things I'm going to teach her and do with her. And so it had to be there just aren't words for that experience and what that must have been like for you, and then again for your sister who was going through such a significant transition of like just getting married. And so as a mom now, I think about it and I'm like, those are the moments that you really want to be there with your kids, and that's really, really hard.
Yeah, it comes up for me a lot in different ways. They say that, people say like time heals, and I would reframe it and say that the grief doesn't actually get smaller, but we grow around the grief. Like we just figure out how to manage it in such a way. So it doesn't get smaller, but in proportion to us, we get bigger. But the grief remains the same. So it comes out in a lot of different ways. As a teenager, it was obviously hard. I have memories of coming home from school and like the house would be empty. Like that was unusual for me. And instead of having like home cooked food and smells and lights on and light and, all of that. So just, from that perspective, um, and now as a mother, it comes out in a different way. I saw, this really lovely reel that, one of these influencers that I enjoy following posted about how she was just having such a hard time. And she came home and her mom had put dinner in her oven and like swooped up her kids to give her a minute and, then left, gave her a kiss and left. And I was like, wow, like I don't have that. And I'm very, very blessed with a huge support system, but that's, it does come out in different ways, through time.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. It's one of those things too where I'm sure now as a mom, like you said, there's just all these little moments where you're like, this is what it is. And I really resonate your description of grief, the way that you experience it and explain it really resonates with me because, having gone through different things, but also holding on to those, personal tragedies, I guess there's no other way to put it. You don't, they never become smaller. You don't ever put it down or forget about it. It's just there with you. And in a lot of ways, like when I think about it, it's a beautiful thing. It's obviously we wish for the alternative, right? Like nobody wishes to like carry it, but it does lend itself to creating the person that you begin to become after the event. And you are so tender and just, like I said at the beginning of this, you've just always been one of those people that has radiated openness and loveliness and it like seeps out of you. And I'm sure so much of that also comes from your mom. And I've seen pictures of your dad. So your dad, like I love, this is a weird thing, but I feel like when I look at people, like I have a pretty good sense of their energies. This sounds so woo woo now, but your dad has always just had such a sweet face. And so I think that your parents' best attributes must be living through you, like loud and proud.
That's very sweet. I love that. I love that about you. That is a really cool thing, I think, to experience. My dad is he's a sweet guy. He's great.
Yeah.
He's also been through a lot, so really more power to him for being on this end of all of that difficulty. And so, so grateful to have him. He's such a wonderful man.
Yeah.
So generous.
I would love to know, because this is such a significant life event, I mean, and it affected your entire family, your mom, everyone's mom, I think, and especially in this case where your mother was such a wonderful person and such a nurturing pillar in your family, that affected each of you individually, I'm sure very, very deeply. Going through this as a teenager, what were some of the ways that you were able to adapt to like this shifting reality? Did you have, tools at your disposal or specific outlets that you utilize to get through these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very, when it comes to trauma and grief, it's kind of just thrown at you, right? Like it's a sink or swim situation. And I definitely feel like I was sinking at some point. A lot of that essay that we talked about earlier, actually talks about it as well, that my response was distraction, which I think is a huge benefit and it helps a lot of people. Sometimes you just have to distract yourself. You cannot sit in the grief all the time. It's all consuming. But I really threw myself in. I played a lot of sports in high school. So I was playing club volleyball. I was in school playing on the school team, and then I'd come home and I'd play volleyball, and it would be like back to back study up until late night until I would just crash and then start again the next day. And it was just constant movement and throwing myself in school. There was a lot of mourning in the middle, in between all that. I had really, really good friends in high school, like soul sister girlfriends. And so that was a huge help in coping. I realize now that not everybody is so lucky to have those kinds of friendship in high school. I'm watching kids nowadays in high school, and it's pretty wild out there. The friendship is very different. There's a lot of, groups, but a lot of things are exclusive and people get left out. But I was really blessed to have great friends in high school. So that was a huge, huge help in terms of coping. And then I think at some point, I was also in therapy. That's very resistant in the beginning, classic teenage sort of thing. And then at some point, I think I realized that, being brave, which was the topic of that essay that I wrote, is not crying. It's not pulling it together. It's actually feeling it and dealing with it head on and moving forward despite all of that. So at some point, it shifted. I slowed down. I stopped playing club. It was just becoming too much. And, things got easier from there. But definitely therapy is helpful. Good friends are really important, and having family around, really important.
Absolutely. I mean, having a support system is so essential to life, just in general. I mean, I think we really have to create different types of support systems for different stations in our life. Like, you have, or hopefully you have mom friends, and then you have, your friends that are with you at work that help you get through the day to day, and then you have your family structure. And I think a lot of that too is being willing and open. Like you said, like sometimes the therapy, which doesn't feel like it's something you want to do initially, ends up being an unlock, and that could be said of a lot of different things. And I also really want to point out that your openness is probably a huge part of how you've been able to maintain, the cadence of your life, and your self-awareness is really admirable, because just being able to kind of take a step back and say, like, oh, this was distraction, which is, one part a good thing, but at a certain point you do have to slow down and allow yourself to move through the grief and hold on to it. I think, going back to that essay, listening to it, it was a really telling, piece of you that you shared with the class at the time. And for me, it like opened my eyes up to being able to say, oh, you can be incredibly vulnerable and basically crack yourself open and share the most painful parts of your life. And what it does is it creates this bravery, this courageousness that other people can look at and admire. And I definitely admired that then, and still now.
Thank you. It's sweet. It's interesting to think back on who I was. We're talking 20 years ago now in high school.
I was going to say college wasn't 20 years ago.
Yeah, high school. I think we're at 20 plus.
Yeah.
What you're talking about. But yeah, it's really wild to think about who I was back then and how I've morphed to who I am now. But a vulnerability, as you called it, I never stopped to think about it. That's always been there. And, kind of talking through things and having the introspection has always been there. And again, thankfully, I had friends through all my life stages who matched that. So going there sort of helps a lot.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Rebecca. So moving through college, it was a very fleeting time you were at school, which was very sad for me, because it took me a while to find like my people. And I suspect if you had stuck around, it wouldn't have felt so much like that.
It was tough. I think you were my only friend at Mount St. Mary's. Maybe I had one other friend at the time, but it was kind of hard to get started there, right?
It was very, I don't necessarily want to say cliquey, but I think first of all, it was a very, very rigorous nursing program. It's It's a great school. I think that a lot of the kids that went there that were very specific about what they wanted to do, like you had, like the liberal arts group and you had the nursing students who were just, that's exactly what they wanted to do. It sounds like you and I might have been on a similar journey in terms of like, you knew that that's what you wanted to do, but there was always that question of, is it? And so perhaps that was just like the thing, at least for me. I struggled against that grain in a lot of, at a lot of different junctures throughout college. And it sounds like that might have been the case for you too, where you're just, when you're not all in like that and you have these kids that are very, very type A, that are very, very all in, you can feel so out of place.
Totally. I'll take a step back here. I struggled a lot during that era.
Mhm.
If you take a second to remember, like, where you went to school at that age was who you are, right?
Mhm.
Like, and what you did and what your major was, like, all of these things, like, really, really defined us at that
Mhm.
age. And I remember having such a hard time with that because, when I didn't know what I wanted really, and I felt a little lost. One part, if we're talking about how childhood really impacts us today, that I haven't mentioned is I have ADHD, which has been a huge now in therapy. I am realizing a huge component of who I am today is I thought was just my personality, but really a lot of it is ADHD. So in high school, I was undiagnosed with ADHD at the time, and just my friends were all off to like, Berkeley, UCLA, like straight into these like really
Mhm.
big name schools, and they knew what they wanted and they were like, flourishing, and I didn't know what I wanted. Um and it was hard to not have that sort of definition of like, well, who you, like I said, who you what like where you went to school just defined you. And like
Mhm.
first people would say to you at that age is like, oh, where do you go? What's your major? And they would just like peg you as this
Mhm.
person. If you didn't have that direction, it kind of made me feel very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So that kind of played a little bit of a role. And, at some point when I was at Mount St. Mary's, I realized I didn't know if this is what I wanted. Um, and, what actually was a catalyst for me to leave was I had spoken to a friend who started at another 4-year school. And I called her out and she's like, yeah, I decided that this is not right for me. And I'm going to Santa Monica College, like, and I'm going to figure it out. And I was like, wait, what? She just like decided to stop. Like, that's allowed. You can do that. Like, I can do that. Like, it was just like a light bulb went off that, I could maybe make that choice. And somehow, thank God, my dad was on board, which is very bizarre, like looking back, but he was totally fine with it. And I ended up leaving and transfer and going to Santa Monica College and kind of figuring myself out from
Yeah.
there, and then eventually transferring to Berkeley, um, which felt right for the time. I wasn't
Mhm.
ready earlier, so that was like the right journey for me.
Yeah. It's incredible the things that we tell ourselves at that age. Like you said, it's like your school is so much a part of your identity, your major is such a part of your identity. And I'm laughing because I wish that I had had like that light bulb moment because I have such similar feelings, or I did at that time. But I'm so stubborn. I think like I'm one of those people that like once I start something, I really like put a lot of pressure on myself to finish it. And I remember at that time, my dad was actually like, well, if you're so unhappy here, like, do you want to like try and figure something else out? And I think because of how stubborn I am or how like fixated I was on just finishing something at that point, like I would not have allowed myself to step outside of the box. And so
Yeah.
it's curious, like it's not like my life has ended up like I'm very, very happy. This journey is exactly the journey that I was meant to be on. But you think about moments like that that are so pivotal and those cross sections in your life where like, you really could take the road less traveled. And you did that. And it's really cool to see how, that lent so much to your self-discovery and figuring things out. At
Yeah.
what at what point when you were at Santa Monica College did you kind of realize like, okay, this is the direction I want to go in?
So, the whole point in Santa Monica College is to eventually transfer to another school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, I went to visit Berkeley, for example. I had friends who went to Berkeley straight from high school, and I went to visit them early on, and I was so overwhelmed. Class sizes were huge. Like, I don't do crowds. Like, I don't love very busy things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember feeling so overwhelmed in these giant lecture halls and being like, there is no way I will go to this school or any school like this.
Mm-hmm.
And, once I, did all the requirements to transfer, and I submitted an application to every school, and it just, something felt right. I think there was a huge part of me that I haven't spoken about was also, this is going to sound a little weird. Growing up in the Valley, there, for listeners who are not from LA, there's this big sort of difference, at least we felt it at the time, between growing up in the Valley and growing up in the city. And particularly in the sub-Persian culture, I grew up very, not very different, but a little different than people in the city. So when I got to Santa Monica College, I was all of a sudden, confronted with a very different aspect of that subculture.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really want to continue that path. So a lot of people ended up going to UCLA, which is a fantastic school, and staying local. And at that point, I finally felt ready to sort of leave and have a new experience. And I don't think I was really brave enough to make that decision at that point, although I was like kind of curious, should I move? Like, moving was a really big deal at that age. Like, Persian parents do not, at least back then, did not want their kids to leave. They were like, keep us around. And I had another good friend, or a friend, someone I had met at Santa Monica College, who was also kind of like dabbling with the idea of going, and she also was Persian. And we kind of were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's jump in. And so I needed a little bit of reassurance from other people. I needed a lot of pushback from my family. I got a lot of flack for deciding to leave to Berkeley. My dad tried to bribe me to stay, in LA. So I don't know. Somehow I just decided that I needed something new. I needed to try something different, and I knew I would come back. So
Yeah. It takes a lot of chutzpah, a lot of to like fight against the grain of your dad bribing you to stay, and then
extended me like getting involved, like the big family being like, you should stay local. I should also mention guilt. There was a lot of guilt to like leave my dad because my mom passed, my sister was married, and my brother got married at that time, so there was also a lot of guilt to leave. So it's funny that you say it, because I don't see myself as a chutzpah kind of gal, but
it is like a moment of stubbornness, like just pure, like, I'm gonna do it anyways, and look how great it turned out.
There are other moments like that now that you brought it to my attention, that it's true. I did that.
Very, very against the grain, which is really interesting because you are so family oriented, and I can relate to that idea of familial guilt, where like if I even talk about moving like outside of LA, like if we talked about moving to San Diego, I think my parents would have like a conniption, because I don't know, as like the oldest daughter and my mom being from the Philippines, it's just like 100%. It would never fly. And there's part of me too where I'm like, I think I'm just going to do it. And this might be like a stage in my life too, where I've been talking to Kevin, and I'm like, we should try something new. Like, I think that we're brave enough to do it. We have our little family, like my parents would be okay. But then there's that huge part where it's like, oh, I need to, for various reasons. It's like, I need to be here to see it all, to be a part of it all. Like, you get like the family FOMO, and then you get the guilt trip from your famey. And I think my siblings have the same thing too, because like my brothers will be like, "What are you talking about? You can't leave."
Yeah, 100%. No, it's such a cultural thing, which is it's like comes back to being a child of immigrants. Like, when they had to leave everything and forced out of their homeland and come here, they're just holding on so tight, right? And I'm not, I have moments where I'm like, LA, I got this love-hate relationship with this city.
Yes.
And I'm a little, it's getting a little crowded for me. It's like over. Why are there so many billboards? Like, I need some more nature. I need some more lush greenery. And I'll have moments where I'm like, let's just go get some acreage and move off to a farm somewhere, buy some land. And then I'm like, nope, can't do it unless they all come. They're never going to join.
I literally have had text messages with like cousins and siblings and like, hey, like, what if we bought like a plot of land and like you build here and I'll build here? Like, that's the only way it would work.
I looked into this in multiple states.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it's not off the table for either of us. This still might happen. God willing, we both have long and fruitful lives ahead of us, maybe with ranch houses and compounds in the future.
One can only dream.
Yeah. Speaking of ranches, and I don't want to skip over too much, so pull me back if there's more we need to talk about. But you clearly, you got through school. You have already established this trend of just being a very brave girl from the get-go. And trying new things, even when they seem really scary. Maybe it takes a little bit of pushing, but just, I think that introspective and curious nature within you, and probably also just like the love and security that you gain from your family relationships, from your parents and your siblings. Like, I think those are all things that really allow a person to be successful. At least that's my motherly input for right now. But you get through school and somehow you meet your husband, and I would love to hear that story because I love a good romance. You guys have you start this beautiful family, and then you get to this point where you do create a place of peace for yourself that isn't filled with asphalt and billboards, but greenery and chicken coops and just peaceful places for you to make your sourdough bread and challah and like all the things that I like salivate over on social media. So how as you transition out of college and academia and becoming who you are in the professional setting, how did you start to find footing to create such an intentional life for yourself? What did that journey look like?
That's a big journey. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to take a moment. I don't want to like romanticize. There's a few things that I want to bring up. Firstly, I mentioned the ADHD that has caused me to have imposter syndrome in all aspects of my life, like big time. And I'm talking from like, how did I get to Berkeley? Like, I don't belong here, like things like that. And then, when I got to Columbia, like I went to like good schools, right? But I would just be like, I don't belong here. It was a fluke that they accepted me. I can't keep up. And like, I did. But so much of that rhetoric was just born from, I think the ADHD, just like having a different brain in terms of how I process information, how I learn in a school setting, and just feeling like I can't do it. So we're talking about a lot of accolades here, but there was a lot of struggle behind that I just want to highlight because I think it's maybe not fair to listeners and to anyone to just think it was, super simple. But I struggle with that. I still struggle with that. Even when I graduated and ended up working with my dad, and even sometimes still, I struggle with imposter syndrome. So there was a lot of that in my journey. But some fun parts, especially the romance, I'll highlight here. When in college at Berkeley, I was dating someone outside the tribe, the Jewish tribe. And that is like a real big deal in my world. And I was in a relationship for 2 years, and I had, recently broken it off upon graduation. I took a year in between graduating and before, to apply to nursing programs in New York and everywhere else. And I took a trip to Birthright classic, to Israel. And I extended that trip and was hanging out with friends that I had met. And I went to, they took me to a bar in Herzliya. So I'm staying at Tel Aviv. And just for people who don't understand, let me put it in the equivalent of the Los Angeles perspective. I left like Santa Monica to go to a bar in like Van Nuys, Canoga Park, right? Like, it makes sense that the friends took me out of the party area to go somewhere else. And so we go to this bar in Herzliya. And Josh had skipped the army that night, which is pretty crazy. He's Israeli. He grew up in Israel, American, but Israeli. And he was at the bar that night with his friends, and we batted eyes at each other. He was just coming out of like a religious upbringing, so he was a little more timid. But I went up to him and spoke to him, and that's how we met. And we had instant chemistry. But I was like an American and on a vacation in Israel.
The brazen American girl.
Like classic, so nothing happened. We had crazy chemistry, but, no kissing, no nothing. Like he had coming out of a religious world. But we spent a lot of time together, a lot of conversations, and we kept in touch. And, eventually I went back home. We kept in touch, and I moved to New York for school the following year, and he had finished the army and come to New York to spend like 6 months. A lot of people do that after they're done with the army, they'll travel or whatever. So he spent 6 months in New York where his sister was, and we reconnected and then immediately started dating. And that was pretty crazy too. So this is what I was alluding to before, where it's like, this is not a typical story, like I was on my third degree as like a Persian girl. And, he had just finished the army and hadn't started his education. And for my family, it was like, well, what are you doing? And for his family, I was religious, and it was like, what are you doing? And so we kind of got into this romance, and he was supposed to go back to Israel, and I had my life here, and it was like, how do we make this work? Are we going to make this work? This feels like it's it. I don't, and kind of navigating that, especially when the families were not thrilled about it, was pretty crazy now that I look back on it.
Yeah, but it can be done. And clearly, now that you guys are 2 kids in, I'm hoping everyone's accepted this.
Everyone is happy. It's actually pretty wild. My husband and my dad have a really beautiful relationship and a really beautiful friendship, a really special one. And I have a great relationship with his family as well. Everyone is now very thrilled, but at the time it was just so other and so not what anyone expected for their children. And as a mother, I like tell Josh all the time, I'm like, if my daughter came to me and said, I'm going to like marry this guy that I met on some trip and he like hasn't started school and you're about to like start your career, I'd be like, what are you thinking? Like, no way. But somehow it was right. It was really right.
Yeah, this is where meeting the person and understanding their values really, really, I think takes precedence over what they've accomplished so far. Because I feel like, I feel like in this, especially now, you could be an Ivy League scholar and just a terrible person, or you could be somebody who's yet to start their education and just have all the makings for somebody really, really great internally first.
The biggest thing is compatibility for me. Like he and I, thank God, Josh and I are super compatible. And so, we're moving through life together and, growing and learning, and he went through school and starting careers and shifting careers. And, it's just really cool that we can really feel like we're on the same team.
I think that's the dream. That's the goal.
Yeah. Thank God. Thank God. I feel very blessed with him.
I love a good love story. I love love. I think maybe that's the other side, the flip side of grief too, is like when you experience tragedy at different scales, I think, at least for me, and I really appreciate you pointing this out earlier that I've always seemed joyous, because I definitely have what I call a dark passenger. But I think that, part of that is, when you live with the grief and you become friends with it in a way, you have to also acknowledge that, like, because you know that those things happen, you have to really lean into celebrating and soaking up all the goodness so that your scales stay balanced to a certain extent. And, especially a parallel is like, having a beautiful relationship. People go through different points in time, and, your timeline and his timeline might have looked a little bit different, but if you team up and are willing to create a solid partnership, it's very, very doable and ultimately the goal. Um, I wanted
Yeah.
to also just kind of circle back really quick because I wanted to ask you this earlier when you mentioned that ADHD has been such a huge part of your life. Were you always aware that you had it, or was this something that you didn't recognize until later on, like in adulthood?
Yeah, I didn't know. There's a few factors. With ADHD, especially 20 plus years ago, was very, how can I put this? I'm stumbling on my words. Um, Girls with ADHD are very underdiagnosed. The symptoms, the way it presents, I shouldn't say symptoms, the way it presents is very different. The classic ADHD that we all remember from childhood, the like,
Mm-hmm.
that boy who was super disruptive and like funny, but like, always got in trouble and couldn't pay attention and couldn't sit still because they were so hyperactive. That was the like stereotypical ADHD. But I would sit there and I was very agreeable and I looked like I was paying attention, but I was inattentive. I couldn't follow the
Mm-hmm.
way that they would teach in a formal classroom setting. Um, you know, so, and I also went to private schools, so there was a lot of accommodation without any like formality,
Mm-hmm.
which was a blessing. But so it wasn't until I was, I think, my last semester of high school that I realized I had ADHD. And that was huge because I discovered sort of medication at that time. I haven't taken medication for ADHD in years, but at that time, especially with like studying and like having to like
Mm-hmm.
hyper focus for a long time, that was really a huge benefit for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Um, it just it lends a lot of context to, and I'm sure that there are listeners out there that can really relate to it, like you said, when we are talking about your journey, which has been, um, it's a beautiful one. Ultimately, like, you have created such a beautiful life for yourself. It hasn't happened to you. You've definitely been, the captain of your own ship, and you've made a lot of decisions and taken a lot of steps and leaps of faith and bravery that have been contradictory sometimes to even what your traditions have been or what your family has wanted. And so to understand that through all of those steps that you've also, you know, I don't necessarily want to say you struggled, but have had to adapt to doing all of those things and seeing the world through a different lens and understanding information in a way that's different to how other people do it. I think it makes it that much more, um, like, just exciting and inspiring and cool that, regardless of the challenges you are met with, just by doing things one step at a time and just leaning into that bravery and kind of leaning into that self introspection and, you know, these little realizations, that those are like the unlocks to success in the long run. Um,
yeah,
and then
it's
it's not a smooth path, but it is a beautiful one.
I do very much appreciate that, and it is something that I have worked on in therapy to reframe in my mind, that despite ADHD, I am here, as
Hmm.
opposed to looking at it as a detriment and, that imposter syndrome that comes out a lot. So yes, thank you. I'm going to take it because I'm going to work on reframing in that capacity.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think now too, what's one of the beautiful things about the time that we're living in, we've talked a little bit about the craziness of social media and how different the world looks now than it did 20, 30 years ago when we were growing up. But I do have a lot of appreciation for early diagnosis and recognition, and now people are able to talk about neurodivergence and different learning abilities and patterns in a way that we weren't able to when we were in school. And so, like you said, a lot of people went underdiagnosed, and there are a lot of us who, are well into our 30s that perhaps have had a lot of these similar presentations or, differences in the way that we think or the way that we learn. And, I've spoken to a lot of women now who are like, wow, if I had realized at that point, or if we had been able to talk about it, like it might have been an easier path per se, because you wouldn't have been struggling against the grain to try to integrate into what's deemed normal society, as opposed to just learning how to adapt and do things in a way that works for you and your brain and the way that you think.
So I actually think that this is a perfect metaphor for my sort of view and struggle today. Not so much in terms of ADHD, although that's always there, but more in terms of this idea of understanding that society, cultural norms, like all of these things are 100% man-made. And that the life we live is, I know this sounds so like idealistic and
no, I'm really leaning into this.
Our life is our life. And, yes, we have to make money to survive. And yes, we can't live in anarchy. Right. But truly it's all made up. And this is, we can get into this aspect of where I ended up after becoming a mother, and having two existential crises, one with each birth, that kind of led me down this sort of path where I feel like I can't necessarily leave LA and change my life and, have the acreage and all the things that we talked about earlier. But how I can sort of make both of these things happen in the world that I live in here, sort of living a foot in reality and then another foot in my reality. And sorry, I should say the reality of the society we live in first, and the other foot in my own reality of my making. This is something I struggle with, and I'm constantly mulling over and chewing on and seeing how I can make it fit into my life. But I struggle with this idea that we have to do what is expected of us, and we're going to work and die. And that's it. Life is work, especially in this country and in LA where it's so busy. Yeah. Work-life balance is insane. And I'm blessed right now. I'm working part-time. But even so, just the emphasis on stuff and the emphasis on more, it's hard to swallow sometimes. So
I can completely relate to that. And as a fellow imposter syndromer, one of the things that's like a theme for me in my life where I don't know, I think it's really funny because a lot of people tell me that I'm a very positive or light person to be around. And I think that comes from a lot of work is happening internally before that all gets expressed. But one of those things is the internal pessimist in me has always been you can't do that, or you didn't earn that, or you don't belong here. And so as an adult, and especially through, my work with Meet Bridget and all of the phenomenal, fantastic women we've interviewed, one of the things that I've started to drill into my own head that has become a product of all of this is just when that voice starts talking to you to just be well, why not? And those two words have sometimes gotten me into trouble with my husband, but most of the time it's like
Me
if I
too.
encounter a no in the world, the first thing that I've started asking myself is like, as that cascade of negativity is starting to like rain down, is like, well, why not? And then I actually have to like spend some time doing the internal work of like, okay, are these valid, answers to that question? And a lot of times there are different solutions, like creative solutions to, like you said, creating a world for yourself that feels like it's your reality while still being a part of reality and like being a productive member of society. But like you can still have, the homesteader life, like, and create your own bubble, and maybe it looks different than the fantasy version or the dream version that we ultimately or initially think of in our heads. But when you do create it, it really is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you say that question. I've had therapy sessions
Yeah.
on, do I deserve this? That is, I mean, I think that we all probably to some extent feel that question pop up. And a huge part of it is, the why not, um, and also that deserving is also man-made. I think I've
Mm-hmm.
realized that like that is a social construct. Like you work hard, you deserve. You don't work hard, you don't deserve. But what does work hard mean?
Mm-hmm.
And especially like leaning into motherhood and working less in the like productive workforce
Mm-hmm.
society. A lot of guilt that I've had where it's like I don't deserve this because I'm not working as hard in that way, and I've had to
Mm-hmm.
reframe it. I'm working hard or harder in other ways,
Mm-hmm.
and also that rest is productive. I'm going to say it again.
Yes.
Rest is productive, and like this huge sort of realization that the society is broken, like especially in this country. Rest is
Mm-hmm.
productive, part of being human, and I don't need to deserve rest. Rest is inherently um, allowed,
Yeah.
should be mandatory, and I don't mean sleeping at night. I mean the rest in between. Um, yeah, it's a hard one to balance, and I definitely have tried to lean into let's make it work right now. So I read a quote from a book recently. I have no idea which one, so forgive me for that. But it said, "The world is not busy; your mind is." It took me a second. Took me a second. And I'm like, I could live in LA. I could live in Tennessee. I could live anywhere. I could live on acreage. And yes, those surroundings might make it easier to slow down, but it's really my head needs to
Mm-hmm.
slow down. And if I can do it there, I can do it here. And that is a conscious choice that we are making. And so I struggle with this still. Like I go through seasons, like a few weeks where I'm like in overdrive, I'm overwhelmed, there's too much going on. And then like, last weekend, and then I'm like, hey, I need to slow down. I need rest. I need a weekend of nothing. I need no commitments, just
Mm-hmm.
to get back on board and to sit and like be in nature and be in my garden and do all the things that I love, because that's kind of where my heart is.
Yeah. Oh, there was a part of me for a second, and it's so funny because it's like this is how you know that this is such an epidemic. It's like as you're saying that, I'm like smiling and listening to it, and then I was like, wait, do I really believe that? Like for myself, you know what I mean? Because hearing you say it, and I think it is part of it's being a mom, part of it's being a woman, part of it is just being that type of person to, feel like you need to do something in order to earn the reward of rest or sleep or a break or a non-committal weekend. Um, it really is. It's hard, and we're very hardwired in this society and in this place and in this country that, to be productive and to be meaningful, we have to continually have our nose to the grindstone. And you burn out that way. And then you have no energy or bandwidth to like provide quality energy and attention to the things that really matter. Um, I'm grateful to motherhood for making it more apparent and
Yes.
essential to slow down.
A
Because I
hundred.
think, like, in so many ways, like, being of that mindset, like my son is definitely my savior, which I'm going to try not to tell him that because that's a lot of pressure for a child. But he
That's an insight that you have on yourself.
is.
It's
Well, I honestly, like, I feel like we could keep going and going. I love the way that your brain works. I love how brave you are, how open you are. And, our 13 plus year reunion has just not disappointed. And I'm so excited to be able to share this with our listeners because you are so self-aware and so smart, Rebecca. Like, you've just always been so smart and articulate and, wow, I'm just really excited to share this with everyone.
thank
But
you.
since I can't keep you, you do have a, home to get back to and two beautiful young children and a whole life outside of our little recording studio. I'm going to start to transition into our fast five if you're ready.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you.
Okay, so in the middle of the hustle and bustle of everyday life, do you have a non-negotiable for each day?
Oh, wow. Great question. Coffee, which I know goes against everything we just talked about, but no, coffee is sort of a ritual. So there's definitely coffee.
Yes, which actually
Um,
leads me to my second question. Go to coffee order.
oh, I'm a purist. A cappuccino or a latte, if it's made like a true latte, not like
Yes.
extra large.
Oh,
Yeah,
love
cappuccino.
it. True latte
Specifically,
is like a shot of espresso and just a little bit of milk.
yeah, well, like the ratio has to be right, and some places are like extra large, and I'm like, no, you cannot do an extra large. Then it's just milk with a little bit of flavor of
Yeah,
espresso. I'm very much a purist. But for anyone who's listening from LA, Cafe Lux does it right. They do great lattes and
I
cappuccinos.
love it.
That's where we get our beans.
I'll have to check it out. Okay, favorite treatment to provide at work
Ah, that's a good
or
one.
most effective?
Botox. Okay, so we didn't talk about this at all, and I know we don't have time, but I will just say I have a love-hate relationship with my job because yeah, I know this is supposed to be fast five, so sorry.
No, go for it. I want it all.
1 foot into like holistic, organic garden, like grow your own. I have backyard chickens, that are raised on organic feed, and I'm like super crazy about toxins. And then I have my other foot into, cosmetic dermatology. And I also have this struggle with like trying to, in that world, you're like telling women and you're telling people these are your problems, let's fix it, right? And I reframe it by saying, I never tell people what they need to fix. They come to me and they tell me what they're insecure about, and we go from
Hmm.
there. That's my approach. It's not the best sales approach, but it's I think the kinder, more human approach.
Yes.
Um, there's this sort of love-hate relationship with this job where it's like I believe in it, but I don't believe in it, which is crazy for me to say on a podcast. But yes, Botox. That's
I
long
love it. It's so funny. I feel so similarly because, you want to be toxin free and as natural as possible. And I believe in aging gracefully. But I think that we have to be kind to ourselves. And if you need a little zhuzh here or there, like it doesn't mean that the rest becomes negated. It just means that it becomes a part of your routine.
They call
Um,
this scrunchy.
what it,
Scrunchy.
yes.
Like, it is like, like super organic, like granola.
Yeah.
You don't wear deodorant. And then scrunchy is sort of like that in between, like somewhat crunchy. It's like
Oh, I like that. Okay.
yeah.
I can subscribe to that. In a similar vein, what is one derm or aesthetics fad that you wish would go away?
Oh, I can list a lot. Um, Big lips, like the really big ones that don't fit people's faces. I think that one's hard, and just also like overfilled
Yeah.
faces. Too much filler. Like less is more, and that's kind of my approach anyway. I have my patients are like, more more. And I'm like, we're going to stop here. Like, this is more. Yeah.
Honestly, thank you for your service. But I think a lot of people also don't realize that filler doesn't go anywhere. It you have to dissolve it.
Yeah. I mean, part of it does get broken down, but a lot of it does stay in the body.
Yeah.
So, it's wild out there. It's the wild, wild west in LA.
And then how do you reset when it's crazy?
Good one. I do this often. No plans, like zero commitments. Obviously besides being a mother and a wife. But like I'll take a weekend where I just cannot commit to birthday parties or plans or see anything, and I'll do what I think is right. I do really well when I get myself in the garden. There's something really grounding, ironically, not ironically, about getting your hands dirty in the soil, working with plants, nurturing, willing life into our food source. So those are really big things, but really it's just sort of stopping and disconnecting from the phone. I have a horrible phone addiction like most of us do.
Yeah.
That's a big one, putting the phone down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. I do that as well. It's like you just put the phone down and walk away from it, or I'll leave it upstairs.
By the way, I bought this box on Amazon that locks your phone for a certain amount of hours that you preset. I just got it because I wanted to get in a good habit, and I'm too scared to use it because that's how it is. So I'll let you know. Actually,
let me know how it goes. Okay. And this is our final question. We ask this of all our guests, but what is one quality you had as a young girl or a teen that you might not have appreciated at that time, but you look back at now and you say, wow, I'm really glad that I've carried that through and that's been a part of me?
The first thing that came to mind was empathy. I was a really sensitive kid. I'm still a very sensitive adult. And I have I have a lot of love-hate relationships. Another one is with the empathy because I feel hard, which is such a powerful thing in terms of relationships and building and connecting with people. And it also could be really hard because, you feel too much and you hold on to too much and you carry it with you all the time. But all in all, I'd say I'm pretty happy that that's still part of me.
Me too. I think it makes for a really beautiful human being. And I don't think our world could ever use enough empathy. It only makes things better.
Amen.
Well, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I'm really excited to share it with all of our listeners. I think that anyone listening to this could gain so much just from the way that you look at the world and articulate how you've navigated through your life in order to create such a beautiful, intentional, way of life for yourself and for your family, and in the way that you've created all of your success. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I am going to link, if it's okay, your Casa Berliner Instagram, and I would love to share your dermatology practice with our listeners as well. We'll be able to put all of that in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming and joining us and for being a part of this community.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Honestly, this has been a really cool, introspective hour. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Really good questions.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. And that's our show. If you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe to, follow, and share Meet Bridget with your circle. The best way to help our work here is to rate and review our podcast. We're listening and constantly working to build something helpful for you. Catch you next time.